Imagine if one of the most powerful habits for protecting your brain did not begin with a prescription, a high tech scan, or an expensive supplement. Imagine if it began at your dinner table. For years, dementia was often discussed as if it were an unavoidable consequence of aging, something written into family history, something that quietly arrives when memories start slipping, names become harder to recall, and familiar routines begin to feel unfamiliar. But researchers have been uncovering a more hopeful and more complicated story. Your brain is not simply waiting to decline, it is constantly responding to the environment you create around it: how you sleep, how you move, how you manage blood pressure, how connected you are to other people, and yes, what you eat every day. One category of food has drawn particular attention because studies suggest it may be associated with a substantially lower risk of cognitive decline and dementia. In one major analysis, people who followed a brain focused eating pattern had up to a 28% lower risk of developing Alzheimer's disease compared with those who followed it least closely. And the most interesting part is that this pattern is not built around rare ingredients or complicated rules. It includes a food that many people already know, but far too few people eat consistently: leafy green vegetables. Now, before we go any further, it is important to be clear. No single food can guarantee protection from dementia. Brain health is shaped by genetics, cardiovascular health, education, activity, sleep, social connection, and many other factors. But evidence suggests that daily dietary choices may influence the biological conditions that either support the brain over time or place it under greater stress. And leafy greens may be one of the simplest places to start. The question is, why? Why would something as ordinary as spinach, kale, arugula, collard greens, mustard greens, Swiss chard, or even romaine lettuce matter to the most complex organ in the human body? The answer takes us inside the aging brain, into the world of blood vessels, inflammation, cellular energy, and a group of nutrients that may help preserve the system's memory depends on. Because dementia does not usually begin on the day someone forgets a familiar name, the biological changes can begin years, sometimes decades earlier. That is why this conversation matters. Most people think of dementia as a brain problem, but researchers increasingly understand that it is also deeply connected to the health of the body's circulation. Your brain weighs only a small fraction of your body weight, yet it uses an enormous amount of energy. It needs a continuous supply of oxygen and nutrients. It depends on an intricate network of blood vessels, some so small that damage can occur long before symptoms become obvious. When those vessels become less flexible, narrowed, inflamed, or damaged by high blood pressure, high blood sugar, smoking, inactivity, or poor diet, the brain may receive less of what it needs to function at its best. And this is where the story takes an unexpected turn. The foods most strongly associated with brain health are often not marketed as brain foods at all. They are not always sold in sleek containers. They do not need celebrity endorsements. They are often sitting quietly in the produce section, surrounded by foods people know are healthy, but do not always prioritize. Leafy greens are one example. Research from the Rush University Memory and Aging Project found that older adults who ate roughly one serving of leafy green vegetables per day experienced slower cognitive decline than those who rarely ate them. The difference was striking. Their rate of cognitive decline was comparable to being about 11 years younger. That does not mean greens make someone biologically 11 years younger. It means the pattern observed in cognitive testing over time was meaningfully different. And while observational research cannot prove that greens alone cause the result, it gives scientists an important clue. Something about these foods may be helping support the aging brain. But researchers later discovered something surprising. It may not be one nutrient doing all the work. Leafy greens contain a combination of compounds that appear to work across several systems at once. They provide folate, vitamin K, lutein, beta-carotene, nitrate, magnesium, potassium, and a range of plant compounds that may help support the body's defenses against oxidative stress. That combination matters because the brain does not age through one single pathway. It ages through many small pressures accumulating over time. Inflammation can increase, blood flow can become less efficient, cells can become less resilient, insulin signaling can become disrupted. The brain's ability to clear waste may change. Tiny injuries to blood vessels may build quietly for years. No one salad can solve all of that, but a daily dietary pattern can influence the terrain. Think of it this way. Your brain is like a city that never sleeps. It needs roads, power stations, clean water, maintenance crews, and waste removal working around the clock. If those systems are supported consistently, the city has more resilience. If they are neglected for decades, small disruptions can eventually become larger problems. Leafy greens may help support several of those systems at once. One of the most important nutrients in greens is folate. Folate helps the body process an amino acid called homocysteine. When homocysteine levels are elevated, studies have linked this pattern with a higher risk of vascular problems and cognitive decline. The relationship is complex, and homocysteine is not the whole story. But adequate folate intake may support normal metabolic processes that are relevant to brain and blood vessel health. Then there is vitamin K. Most people associate vitamin K with blood clotting, but it also appears to play roles in the nervous system. Researchers have found that vitamin K is involved in the metabolism of certain fats that are important for brain cell membranes. Brain cells rely on healthy membranes to communicate. Every thought, memory, movement, and emotion depends on billions of cells sending signals across tiny gaps. When we talk about preserving cognitive function, we are really talking about preserving communication. And the brain is a communication network unlike anything humans have ever built. But that is not the most interesting part. Leafy greens also contain lutein, a yellow-orange pigment found in dark green vegetables. You may have heard about lutein in relation to eye health because it accumulates in the retina. But scientists have also found lutein in the brain. In several studies, higher levels of lutein in brain tissue have been associated with better cognitive performance in older adults. Researchers are still working to understand exactly why, but lutein may help protect cells from oxidative stress and may support the integrity of neural tissue. This is a powerful reminder that nutrition rarely works in isolated compartments. The same compounds that help protect the eyes may also be relevant to the brain. The same dietary habits that support blood vessels may also support memory. The same meals that help stabilize blood sugar may influence the long-term health of the nervous system. And this is where one of the biggest myths about dementia needs to be corrected. The myth is that brain health begins when memory problems begin. In reality, prevention often begins much earlier. Long before someone notices changes in memory, the brain may already be responding to decades of sleep patterns, activity levels, blood pressure, food quality, stress, and social engagement. That is not meant to create anxiety. It is meant to create agency. Because if the brain is shaped by long-term habits, then long-term habits can also become a source of protection. The Mind diet, which combines elements of the Mediterranean diet and the DASH diet, was designed around this idea. It emphasizes foods associated with brain and cardiovascular health, including leafy greens, other vegetables, berries, nuts, beans, whole grains, fish, poultry, olive oil, and moderate amounts of wine in some versions of the research. In studies of this dietary pattern, people who followed it more closely showed lower rates of Alzheimer's disease. One widely discussed finding suggested that even moderate adherence to the Mind diet was associated with a lower risk. The phrase moderate adherence is important. It means you do not have to eat perfectly to move in a healthier direction. You do not need to throw away every food you enjoy. You do not need to become obsessed with every meal. You do not need to transform your life overnight. What appears to matter is the pattern. What do you eat most days? What is the default meal when life gets busy? What foods show up on your plate often enough to influence your biology over years rather than days? For many people, leafy greens are not missing because they dislike them. They are missing because they are inconvenient. They spoil quickly. They feel boring. They are treated as a side dish instead of something central to the meal. But researchers believe consistency may be more important than culinary perfection. A handful of spinach and eggs, arugula added to a sandwich, kale folded into soup, collard greens cooked with beans, a large salad with olive oil, nuts, and colorful vegetables, frozen spinach added to a smoothie, stew, or lentil dish. These choices may seem small, but small choices repeated daily can become a biological signal. And there is another hidden reason greens may matter: nitric oxide. Leafy greens, especially arugula, spinach, and certain lettuces, contain naturally occurring nitrates. In the body, dietary nitrates can be converted into nitric oxide, a molecule that helps blood vessels relax and function more efficiently. Why is that relevant to the brain? Because healthy blood flow is not just about the heart, it is about delivery. Your brain depends on a constant delivery of oxygen and nutrients. As we age, the ability of blood vessels to respond and adapt may become less efficient. Supporting vascular health through movement, blood pressure management, sleep, and dietary patterns may help preserve the conditions the brain needs to stay resilient. Yet the real discovery came years later, when scientists began connecting the dots between cardiovascular health and cognitive health. What protects the heart often helps protect the brain. High blood pressure in midlife, for example, has been associated with a higher risk of cognitive decline later in life. Type 2 diabetes is associated with changes in blood vessels and metabolism that may affect the brain. Physical inactivity can influence circulation, inflammation, and insulin sensitivity. Poor sleep can affect memory processing and metabolic health. These are not separate stories. They are chapters of the same story. The brain does not float above the body. It lives inside it. That means a brain-supportive diet is not only about memory, it is also about supporting the systems that memory relies on: blood vessels, metabolism, inflammation control, and cellular energy. Now, this does not mean leafy greens are the only food that matters. In fact, focusing too narrowly on one food can sometimes distract us from the bigger picture. A plate of greens beside a diet dominated by ultra-processed foods, sugary drinks, chronic overeating, and little movement may not create the same benefit as greens within an overall healthy pattern. But adding greens can be a powerful entry point because it often leads to other improvements. A person who eats a large salad at lunch may be less likely to reach for highly processed snacks later. Someone who adds sautéed greens to dinner may naturally eat more beans, olive oil, garlic, herbs, and vegetables. A morning omelet with spinach may replace a breakfast built around refined carbohydrates and added sugar. Food choices interact. One healthy habit can make another habit easier. And this is where the practical lesson becomes much more useful than simply saying, eat more kale. The goal is not to find the one perfect brain food. The goal is to create a daily pattern that makes the healthier choice automatic. Start with one serving of leafy greens most days. A serving does not need to be enormous. It can be a cup of raw greens or about half a cup cooked. If you already eat greens occasionally, the next step is not necessarily eating more at once. It may be eating them more consistently. Choose the form you are most likely to repeat. If salads feel like a chore, use greens in warm meals. If kale is too bitter, try spinach. If fresh vegetables spoil before you use them, keep frozen spinach in the freezer. If cooking feels difficult, buy pre-washed greens and add them to meals you already make. The best brain-supportive food is often not the most impressive one. It is the one you will actually eat tomorrow. And once that habit becomes easier, something else begins to happen. You start seeing food differently, not as a list of rules, not as a source of guilt, not as a temporary plan you follow for a few weeks before life gets busy again, but as information. Every meal sends signals. Some signals may support stable blood sugar, healthier blood vessels, and lower levels of chronic inflammation. Others may push the body in the opposite direction when they become the dominant pattern over years. That is why the question is not, did I eat perfectly today? The more useful question is, what direction is my daily pattern moving me? Because dementia risk is not shaped by one lunch, one holiday meal, or one missed workout, it is shaped by the accumulation of thousands of ordinary days. And researchers are beginning to understand just how much those ordinary days can matter. One of the most fascinating findings in brain health research is that the brain has something called cognitive reserve. This is the ability to keep functioning even when age related changes or disease related changes begin to develop. Think of cognitive reserve as a kind of backup capacity. Two people can have similar changes in the brain as they age, but one person may continue functioning well for much longer. Why? Scientists believe that education, mentally stimulating activities, social connection, physical activity, sleep, and nutrition may all help build resilience over time. This does not mean someone can outsmart every biological process. It means the brain may have more capacity to adapt when it has been supported throughout life. And this is where nutrition becomes even more interesting. A brain supportive eating pattern may not simply provide nutrients, it may also help create the metabolic environment in which the brain can repair, adapt, and communicate more effectively. For example, one of the biggest threats to healthy aging is not necessarily dramatic illness, it is chronic metabolic dysfunction that develops quietly. Blood sugar that stays elevated too often, blood pressure that slowly rises, excess visceral fat around the organs, loss of muscle mass, poor sleep, low physical activity, highly processed foods becoming the default. None of these changes need to feel urgent in the moment, but over time, they can affect the same systems that influence brain health. This is why a plate of leafy greens can represent something much larger than a vegetable. It can represent a shift toward protecting the body's infrastructure. And scientists have observed that diets rich in plant foods tend to provide more fiber, potassium, magnesium, polyphenols, and other compounds that may support metabolic and cardiovascular health. These foods may also help people feel fuller, making it easier to maintain a healthy body weight without relying on extreme restriction. However, that is not the most interesting part. The gut may also be involved. Your digestive system is home to trillions of microorganisms. Together, they form what scientists call the gut microbiome. These microbes help break down certain fibers and plant compounds that your body cannot fully digest on its own. When you eat more plant foods, including leafy greens, beans, berries, nuts, seeds, and whole grains, you feed a wider range of beneficial microbes. In return, some of these microbes produce compounds that may influence inflammation, metabolism, and immune function. Researchers are still studying exactly how the gut and brain communicate, but the connection is becoming impossible to ignore. The gut sends signals to the brain through nerves, hormones, immune pathways, and metabolic compounds. The brain also influences the gut through stress responses, sleep, and nervous system activity. It is a two-way conversation, and that means your daily food choices may influence far more than digestion. They may help shape the environment in which your brain ages. Now, it is important not to oversimplify this science. The microbiome is highly individual. There is no single perfect gut profile, and no one food can fix the microbiome overnight. But research suggests that dietary diversity matters. Instead of eating the same few foods every week, try rotating different greens and vegetables. Spinach one day, arugula another, bok choy in a stir fry, collard greens with beans, mixed greens with lentils and olive oil, cabbage in soup, herbs added generously to meals. Different plants contain different fibers and phytochemicals. Variety may give your gut microbes a broader menu and your body a wider range of nutrients. And this is where the story becomes practical. If you want to eat leafy greens every day, you do not need to force yourself into a giant salad routine. You need a system. The first strategy is to make greens visible. People often eat what is easiest to see and easiest to prepare. If greens are buried in the back of the refrigerator, they are likely to be forgotten. Keep pre-washed greens at eye level. Store frozen spinach where you can reach it quickly. Put a bag of arugula near foods you already use, like eggs, yogurt, or sandwich ingredients. The second strategy is to attach greens to habits you already have. If you make eggs in the morning, add spinach. If you eat sandwiches at lunch, add arugula or romaine. If you cook soup, stir in kale or chard near the end. If you make rice, pasta, lentils, or beans, serve them over a bed of greens or fold greens directly into the dish. This is called habit stacking, and it works because you are not relying on motivation alone. You are building a cue. Breakfast becomes the cue for spinach. Lunch becomes the cue for arugula. Dinner becomes the cue for cooked greens. Over time, the habit becomes less of a decision and more of a default. But there is another issue many people never consider. How you prepare greens may affect whether you keep eating them. Raw greens are convenient, but cooked greens can be easier to eat in larger amounts because they shrink dramatically when heated. Lightly sautéing spinach, kale, or Swiss chard with olive oil, garlic, onions, beans, or eggs can make them more satisfying and more enjoyable. Adding a source of healthy fat may also help the body absorb certain fat-soluble compounds found in vegetables, including carotenoids. That does not require a large amount of oil. A drizzle of olive oil, a handful of nuts, avocado, seeds, or a serving of fish can be enough to make a meal more balanced and flavorful. And this is one reason the Mediterranean-style eating pattern has attracted so much attention. It is not built around deprivation. It is built around combinations. Vegetables with olive oil, beans with herbs, fish with greens, berries with yogurt, nuts with fruit, whole grains with vegetables and legumes. These combinations make healthy eating feel less like punishment and more like a way of living. Yet the real discovery is not that one culture found the perfect diet. It is that many of the healthiest dietary patterns around the world share common principles. They emphasize plants. They include fiber-rich foods. They limit highly processed foods. They include healthy sources of fat. They make room for protein. And they are sustainable enough to continue for years. That last point may be the most important. A dietary pattern only helps if it becomes part of your real life. If you hate kale, you do not need kale. Try spinach. Try bok choy. Try romaine. Try cabbage. Try herbs like parsley and cilantro. Try frozen greens in soups and curries. Try a vegetable you actually enjoy. The science does not require you to suffer. It asks you to create a pattern you can repeat. And while food matters, it works best when combined with other brain-supportive habits. Movement is one of the most powerful examples. Regular physical activity supports blood flow, insulin sensitivity, mood, sleep, and muscle mass. It may also stimulate the release of molecules that support brain plasticity, the brain's ability to adapt and form new connections. You do not need to become an endurance athlete to benefit. Walking, cycling, swimming, strength training, gardening, dancing, and even frequent movement breaks throughout the day can all contribute to a more active lifestyle. Research suggests that both aerobic exercise and resistance training may be relevant for healthy aging. The key is consistency. A 20-minute walk done most days may be more meaningful than an intense workout done once every few weeks. And strength training becomes especially important as we age. Muscle is not just for appearance. It plays a major role in glucose regulation, mobility, balance, independence, and resilience. Maintaining muscle may help support metabolic health, which in turn may support the brain. Sleep is another essential part of the story. During sleep, the brain appears to carry out important maintenance processes. Scientists are studying how sleep may influence the clearance of metabolic waste products, memory consolidation, immune regulation, and hormonal balance. Poor sleep does not automatically cause dementia, but chronic sleep disruption, especially when combined with other risk factors, may place additional stress on the brain and body. This is why a brain health plan is not just about what you add to your plate. It is also about what you protect in your schedule. Protect your sleep. Protect your movement. Protect your blood pressure. Protect your relationships. Protect your curiosity. because social isolation and lack of mental stimulation can also affect healthy aging. Conversations, learning new skills, reading, volunteering, playing music, solving problems, traveling, and staying engaged with other people may all help support cognitive resilience. The brain thrives on challenge. It thrives on novelty. It thrives on connection. And perhaps that is the most hopeful message in all of this. Aging is not one fixed path. There are things we cannot control, including genetics, past experiences, and certain medical conditions. But there are also many things we can influence. We can choose to move our bodies. We can choose to learn. We can choose to stay connected. We can choose to build meals around foods that support long-term health. And we can choose to make those decisions before we feel forced to. If you are wondering where to begin with one simple question. What can I do today that my future brain may thank me for? Maybe it is adding spinach to breakfast. Maybe it is taking a walk after dinner. Maybe it is cooking beans and greens instead of ordering another highly processed meal. Maybe it is calling someone you have not spoken to in a while. Maybe it is going to bed 30 minutes earlier. These actions may seem almost too small to matter, but health is rarely transformed by one dramatic moment. It is shaped by repeated moments, by the breakfast you eat when nobody is watching, by the walk you take even when you do not feel like it, by the vegetables you add to dinner, by the strength you build, by the sleep you protect, by the relationships you maintain, and by the belief that your future health is worth investing in now. Leafy greens may not be glamorous. They may not come with a bold promise or a dramatic headline, but their value may lie in something more powerful. They are accessible, versatile, nutrient-dense, and easy to make part of a long-term pattern. Research suggests that eating them regularly may support the systems that help the brain stay resilient as we age. Not because they are magic, but because the body responds to what we do repeatedly. The decisions we make today may seem small, but over years and decades, those choices can shape how we age, how we feel, and how long we remain healthy. That is why understanding the science matters.